So welcome everyone to the winter webinar of the Centre for Mobilities Research, which is also known as CeMoRe at Lancaster University. I'm Nicola Sperling and currently the director of CeMoRe. I'm based in Lancaster Sociology, and I direct CeMoRe along with Lynn Pearce, who's also here today, and she's co-director for Mobilities and the Humanities. So our membership of CeMoRe spans across disciplinary boundaries, and the focus on mobilities takes us into diverse topics. And today's webinar, Poetry and Public Diplomacy, the Case of Western Sahara, is being held in collaboration with the British Academy-funded Desert Disorders Project. And it very much speaks to our mobilities and the humanities research area and to that aspect of our research community. So we're really delighted to be co-hosting this event with you. I want to introduce Catherine Baxter, who's going to chair today's session. Catherine is Professor of English Literature at Northumbria University, and she's currently leading the Desert Disorders Project in collaboration with Professor Deborah Sutton from Lancaster University and Professor Farhana Ibrahim from IIT Delhi. And just on a practical note, today's session's been recorded and it will be available via the CeMoRe website in the coming weeks. Which is at www.lancaster.ac.uk/CeMoRe. And also the Q&A space is open in this webinar. So that's where we'll get questions from you, and we'll pick up those questions in the Q&A discussion at the end of the talks. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine at this point and yeah, let you sort of introduce the panel. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nicola, and thanks, Lynn, as well. And thank you both for giving us this opportunity to collaborate together. As Nicola said, this is a project is a kind of, or this talk today is a collaboration between the Desert Disorders Project, which is funded by the British Academy Knowledge Frontiers Scheme, and CeMoRe. We're really excited to be working with CeMoRe on this. Our project is kind of aims to recenter deserts and arid regions from kind of the margins of scholarship and also the margins of how people think geographically, I suppose, where they're often placed, and to consider deserts in as central to our study, but also as if we kind of put them in our focus, how we're interested in how that might shift colonial and post-colonial histories and ways in which we kind of think about these regions. And we're doing this specifically through a kind of interdisciplinary approach. So we bring together Deborah, Farhana and myself, sort of our scholarship in literature and history and in social anthropology, and we're interested in seeing how these different disciplines might work together and help us reconsider desert and arid regions in that kind of history. So we're really delighted to be hosting this event, hosting recent research by Joanna Allen and Moita Mohammed Azrouk, not least because they're doing very much what we're interested in as well, in terms of bringing these different disciplinary expertise to bear on their subject of study in Western Sahara. So I'm going to introduce them and their paper briefly. Let me just flip spaces so I get to the right bits. Here we go. So their paper today is on poetry and public diplomacy in Western Sahara, and it comes out of some Arts and Humanities Research Council funded a project which they've been working on together. And yeah, and they're going to kind of talk through some of this recent research that they've been doing. So I'm going to introduce them. Joanna Allen is Associate Professor in Global Development at Northumbria University. Her latest book, Saharan Winds, Energy Systems and Aeolian Imaginaries in Western Sahara, is coming out soon, in about a year, next autumn, with West Virginia University Press. Moiti Mohammed Al-Zarouk works at the Training and Entrepreneurship and Consultancy Centre in the Sahrawi State in Exile, and she's working on an anthology of Sahrawi poetry. We were supposed to have with us as well Brahim El-Gouabli, who's Chair and Associate Professor of Arabic Studies and Comparative Literature at Williams College in Massachusetts. He's unable to join us. He was going to be providing the response, but he sent me he sent his apologies and has sent a kind of typed version of his response, which I will read and pose his questions for Joanna and Moiti, and then they'll kind of answer that, and we'll open up to everybody who's here for a broader kind of set of Q&A. But just to explain, so Brahim El-Gouabli is, his research encompasses language politics, indigeneity, human rights, transnational justice, political violence, archive creation, memory studies, and Amazi Berber literatures and environmental humanities. So this was something he was really excited about and is really sorry not to be here. So I think that gives you a sense of both our kind of broader project. As I said, this is our first event, and we'll have more coming in the spring and in the autumn next year, culminating with a conference in Delhi next winter. So if you're interested in deserts more broadly, questions of mobility and bordering and environment, please do get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you, and hopefully we'll see you at other events in due course. But for today's event, I'm going to hand over now and mute myself and let Joanna and Moiti share their work.
Thanks so much, Catherine, and thanks to Catherine at Northumbria and Nicola and Lynn at CeMoRe in Lancaster for inviting us to speak today. So in our paper, hopefully you can see the first slide there.
Yes.
Great, thanks. We'll be arguing for greater consideration of the role of poetry and poets in diplomacy. And we're using the case of Sahrawi poets engaging Spanish, Mauritanian and international audiences. And we argue that poetry can be considered a form of public diplomacy and poets as public diplomats when advocating for a state policy, interest or cause. So we hope to contribute to ongoing debates about the role of non-state actors in public diplomacy and on the place of emotion in diplomacy. So this paper, as Catherine mentioned, forms part of a wider project funded by the AHRC that Moiti and I have been working on together, along with another colleague, Hamza Lakhal. And the project's focused on promoting more engagement with Sahrawi poetry in UK cultural institutions. And that's involved recording Sahrawi poets reciting their works and also giving their life histories for a collection in the British Library Sounds Archive and also for the Sahrawi University of Tifariti new oral history collection. And the recordings are also available online, so we'll show you those later briefly. And we've also been working with cultural institutions, as I mentioned. So, for example, the Poetry Translation Centre here in the UK and the Stephen Spender Trust on translating Sahrawi poetry and promoting it in schools with the Stephen Spender Trust, and also with the decolonisation strand of an association of Spanish as foreign language teachers with a view to promoting Sahrawi poetry on Hispanic studies courses here, as lots of Sahrawis write and compose in Spanish. So in terms of the structure of our talk, we'll first give you some history to diplomatic developments in Western Sahara in order to contextualise the rest of our paper. Then we'll go on to explain our fieldwork and our analysis. So I'll hand over to Moiti now.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure for me to be among you today to present, to present our research, poetry and public diplomacy. So, Western Sahara is traditionally inhabited by nomadic tribes who are very fond of their freedom. They are tolerant and peace-loving and freedom. Western Sahara is a non-self-governing territory according to the United Nations and a sovereign state and a member of the African Union. Its history is full of people's struggle against colonialism and invasion attempts. Western Sahara, it's located in the northwest Africa. It covers an area of 2,066 square kilometers, and it's bordered by Morocco to the north, Algeria to the northeast, and Mauritania to the east and south. And for those, like usually when people hear about Western Sahara, they think that's just deserts, but no. But Western Sahara, it has 1,200 kilometer long Atlantic Ocean coastline. It's the last colony in Africa. It was colonized by Spain in 1884. By the mid of the 60s, the UN was calling for the Sahara decolonization, and pro-independence Sahrawi movement began to struggle for the same in the 60s. Spain harshly repressed this first movement. But this movement was replaced by another movement in 1973, which is the Sahrawi Liberation Movement, which that is known of Polisario Front, which remained the only UN-recognized representative of the Sahrawi people. In 1974, Spain announced the plan to decolonize Western Sahara. But the neighboring Morocco then demanded an international court of justice, advisory opinion on its view that prior the Spanish colonization, Western Sahara had been part. When Spain was about to leave and decolonize Western Sahara, Morocco claimed that Western Sahara is a part of Morocco. Actually, they did not claim that Western Sahara is part of Morocco. They also claimed that Mauritania is a part of Morocco and also part of Senegal and also some part of Algeria. But they asked they demand the International Court of Justice opinion about this issue, and the International Court of Justice found the opposite. They said that, let me just quote. They said that Western Sahara, is not a part of Morocco. It gave a negative answer to the first question to the question, stating that the materials and the information, I'm quoting, the materials and the information presented to it do not establish any tie of territorial sovereignty between the territory of Western Sahara and the Kingdom of Morocco or Mauritania entity. But beside the answer of the International Court of Justice, Morocco called Morocco and Mauritania and also Spain negotiated an illegal agreement by which the former two countries would divide Western Sahara between themselves, and Spain would remain a portion of revenue from Western Sahara rich natural resources. They did the Madrid Agreement, in which they divided Western Sahara between Morocco. The northern part was invaded by Morocco, and the southern part by Mauritania. The Moroccan and the Mauritanian forces invaded Western Sahara in the late October 1975. The Moroccan air forces napalmed the Sahrawi refugees who fled to Algeria, and Algeria offered them asylum. So it's also important to mention how the Sahara. Let me just. and when the Sahrawi people fled because the Moroccan force they used the napalm and the white phosphor. They fled to Algeria, and they found and the Algeria welcomed them. The Polisario Front built a state in the exile, which is the Sahrawi Arabic Democratic Republic, there in February 1976. And as Fernandez Morena and Oveja Garcia's note, the Sadr differs from other self-declared states in that it has organized not from secession, but from foreign occupation and failed decolonization. Let me just. When the Sahrawi fled to Algeria, they built a state in the exile. But when they came there, let me just, Dr. Pablo San Martin states in his book, Nationalism, Identity and Citizenship in the Western Sahara, that the Sahrawi refugees were set up in place where there was nothing and everything had to be done. The Sahrawi have always believed that they will return to their land sooner or later when it is independent. As a result of that, they devoted their time preparing for that. And indeed, for the Sahrawi, the camps were blank space on which to write a new historical narrative based on the desire of an independent national state. The period of the 1975, the Sahara crisis marked one of the hardest days for the Sahrawi. And the Sahrawis found Algeria as Mondi, described it. They found Algeria as a safe haven. Sorry, my mom was calling me. In 1979, Polisario fighters had overcome Mauritania forces, and the two parties signed a peace agreement. However, the war between the Polisario Front and Morocco continues until 1991, and the United Nations, through a shuttle diplomacy, negotiated a ceasefire through the Houston Accords, which promised the Sahrawi people a referendum with the option of independence. At the beginning of the 1992, Morocco signed this agreement, but later tried to register thousands of its own citizens as a voter. The lengthy evaluation rejected and appealed process that followed blocked the referendum for years. By the turn of the century, the idea of the third way of autonomy for Western Sahara under the Moroccan rule started to gain ground inside the UN. And far away from the Houston Accords, the UN Security Council started to look for mutually acceptable solution to provide self-determination to the Sahrawis. James Baker, the former US Secretary of State, and at the time he was the UN envoy to Western Sahara, proposed a plan that offered this third way with no explicit option of independence. This contradicted the entire the UN discourse on decolonization, and so Baker went back to the drawing board. And in 2003, he offered a revised plan which would see 4 to 5 years of Western Sahara autonomy under the Moroccan rule, followed by a referendum on independence in which Moroccan citizens living in the occupied territories of Western Sahara, as well as Sahrawis, would be allowed to vote. given the Moroccan settlers outnumbers Sahrawis, it was perhaps surprising that the Polisario Front accepted this plan, accepted the Baker's second plan. And however, Morocco rejected it. So as a result of that, James Baker resigned in 2004. Later in 2007, through a direct and indirect negotiation, the UN Security Council called the both parties to present their own proposals. Morocco presented the same plan as Baker's first plan, and the Polisario Front presented a plan that would offer Morocco a 10-year cooperation agreement. Yet none of that changed the status quo. Non-Morocco accepted the Polisario Front plan. Polisario Front accepted the Moroccan plan, which is the same plan as the Baker's first plan. And over the years that followed, increasingly daring and widespread protests by the Sahrawi living under the Moroccan occupation have been constantly repressed with brutality, while the international community has constantly looked the other way, thereby empowering Morocco. This diplomatic failure resulted in November 2020 breaking of ceasefire. On 2020, the Moroccan violated the ceasefire agreement, so that as a result of that, the Polisario Front and Morocco are now in war. The Sadr, the Sahrawi Republic, a full member of the African Union, has been active in diplomatic arena since its founding in 1976, and since then it has been recognized by more than 80 countries. The Sahrawi Republic Diplomatic Corps has not only targeted the normal diplomats of parties engaged in the conflict, but also the public of its enemy governments. For instance, the statement of condolence expressed by the Sahrawi government to the Moroccan people affected by the devastating earthquake on 8 September 2023. The Sahrawi do not only use formal ways to deliver their diplomatic messages, but also informal and artistic means such as songs and poems. The case of Sahrawi poetry is of special interest because Sahrawis complain of a lack of platform for Sahrawi voices in media and policy discussions. On November 2020, return to war, while think tanks and mainstream media channels fail to extend microphone to the Sahrawi, the latter take to social media to share their view on the war and diplomatic failure via the medium. It's very popular in the Sahrawi society. They use poetry to share what's going on about the conflict and the struggle of the Sahrawi people. Just as Alson highlights that exploring diplomatic disputes through poetry is important because, I'm quoting, because poetry presents a perspective on the events that it's not found in the official court history. In historical context, Sahrawi poetry can likewise provide insight relevant to both international relation and literature scholars with a view to conflict. We focus on poets engaging audience in Mauritania, Spain, and international community for two reasons. Firstly, these particular audiences are of interest given their role in Western Sahara conflict. Spain as a colonizer and later as a party that sold the Sahara to their neighbors. and Mauritania as a bilingual power and occupier of Western Sahara until 1999, and the international community as responsible for failing to hold Morocco to account. Before handing over to dear Joanne, it's important to mention that they as a writer, I don't remember his name, he said like he visited the camp and he said like all the people in the camps, Sahrawis are, you can say that they are almost politically cultivated about their issue and the conflict. He said like he asked a girl, a child, and he said like what's going on with Western Sahara, and she told him like I'll tell you, it's just as simple as that, like we are occupied by Morocco and Algeria, homed us. So yeah, and when we interviewed like another poem, like all the people are focusing, in the when we a poet, which an older poet called Al-Bashir Wal-Li'li, when he said like they asked me if I write about women, specific women. He said like before the war I used to write poems about specific women, but now I'm writing about all the women, and before also I used to write poems about specific places that are dear to me in the desert, but now like all Western Sahara, all part of our land is dear to me, and I cannot write about specific place, but I am writing about the land which is was taken from us and occupied by Morocco. And thank you for listening. I hand it over to Joanna.
Thanks, Marty. So I'll just explain a little about our fieldwork to start. So in terms of methodology, we carried out focus groups and interviews with Mauritanian poets and Mauritanian poetry enthusiasts in Nouakchott, as well as interviews with Sahrawi poets living in Spain, and then 7 Sahrawi poets living in the refugee camps or state in exile in Algeria, including one poet who was a serving diplomat of the Sahrawi Republic. And we also carried out some participant observation, at poetry events in the camps. And a lot of these events involved poetry exchanges from poets of several nations, which is interesting from the point of view of diplomacy. So we're situating ourselves in an interdisciplinary way, so as well as in literary studies in international relations. So looking at international relations, literature on diplomacy. Diplomacy can be defined as, and I'm quoting Sending here, representing a polity vis-a-vis a recognised other, end of quote. But there's a idealist divide in how international relations scholars understand diplomacy. So realists see diplomacy as a tool for pursuing national interests, whereas idealists see diplomacy's role as one for resolving conflicts and making a more peaceful world. And then beyond this binary, scholars have begun to theorize different modes of diplomacy that go beyond this sort of traditional Western state-to-state model of diplomacy. So this includes a focus on public diplomacy. As for public diplomacy, so scholarship now includes a focus on unofficial and non-state actors and policies. And on public diplomacy policies that engage or originate from civil society actors. So that's where our framing is. And we're focusing on non-state actors, poets in our case, and their engagement with publics, foreign publics, in pursuit of the aims of their state. So poets engaging civil society in other countries, but with the aims of the Sahrawi Republic in mind, specifically the aim of independence. And then looking at scholarship in literary studies, cultural anthropology and cultural studies, we can see from that it's well established that poetry and diplomacy have been intertwined in various historical contexts across the globe. So from Europe to China and beyond, poetry has been used to express policy recommendations and diplomatic positions between states. Poetry has been used to settle disputes and wars, and poetry has been used as a vehicle to seek alliances across many different cultures. And this is also true of the poetry of Western Sahara and of Mauritania too. So Western Sahara and Mauritania share some cultural heritage, and one of those things is a Hassaniya poetry tradition. So Hassaniya is the dialect of Arabic that is spoken in Mauritania and Western Sahara, but the language has also given rise to a whole poetic tradition. So in Hassaniya poetry, traditionally tribes in Western Sahara and Mauritania used poets to increase their standing. They used poets to lampoon other tribes, and also they used poets to inspire people to fight on behalf of the tribe. It's also interesting the different genres that exist within the Hassaniya poetic tradition. So there's one genre called the Gutta, that allows two poets who would sometimes be from different tribes, though not necessarily, to battle using the medium of verse over which tribe was superior, and also for debating a whole range of different matters. And the Gutta genre follows various values, ethics, characteristics and controls. So rather like modern day Western state diplomats, competitors using the Gutta should maintain social, religious and ethnic values, and they should respect their competitor by avoiding blunt language and using precise but indirect language. Hassaniya poems in themselves also recall histories of diplomatic intrigues all the way back to the 12th century. It's a really rich tradition for looking at history too. And within these poems, we can see examples of where poetry has been used for mediation and provocation over history. And so what we think we're seeing today with Sahrawi poets as public diplomats is a repurposing of traditional Sahrawi and Hassaniya modes of diplomacy to engage with international audiences today, where in those, with regards to international audiences and the other countries and communities that are targeted with this diplomacy, modern modes of diplomacy there are quite different to what we see in the Mauritanian and Saharan traditions, and focus much less on the cultural. So what we're hoping to contribute to the discussion in international relations, where there's sort of scarce research on the relationship between diplomacy and poetry, is just this, so that we should consider poets more seriously when we're looking at public diplomacy. So just looking at the analysis that arose from the fieldwork, we'll turn first to the Mauritanian example. Mati has mentioned that Polisario was at war with Mauritania from 1975 to 1979, and during this period of war, the Polisario, the Sahrawi Liberation Movement, would play a lot of Sahrawi poetry and song, and we should point out that poetry and song are indivisible in Sahrawi culture. So they'd play a lot of Sahrawi poetry over Radio Sahara, which was the Western Sahara's radio station, but this was audible throughout Mauritania, and lots of Mauritanians tuned in, although they weren't officially allowed to. And so since the start of this war, Polisario had encouraged poets and musicians to support and disseminate the national cause through their art. So in Mauritania, this strategy had a certain degree of success, we'd argue. So Sahrawi poetry and song gained and still has a high degree of popularity in Mauritanian society in general. But also what we found through our research was that Mauritanians that fought for Polisario were particular fans. So some Mauritanians did join the Polisario side of the war. So we've got one quotation below that illustrates this from a Mauritanian fighter who joined Polisario a bit later in 1979 as the war with Morocco continued till 91. And the quote reveals how the influence that poetry and song had on his decision to take up arms. So you've got it on the screen, but I'll just read it out. So I'm a Mauritanian, and I was working at a company when I heard those songs and poems. Because of those revolutionary songs, I left my job at the time without getting paid and walked around 70 kilometers on foot to join the Sahrawi fighters in 1979. I was shot in the knee while fighting alongside my comrades. You can see the wound here. Not just myself, but many Mauritanians experienced that. Simply because of such revolutionary songs and poems, they joined the Sahrawi Revolution. So I'll leave it there, just because we've got lots to get through today. So this quote was illustrative of several other similar quotes that came up during our interviews, which it surprised me at the time. It wasn't what we'd sort of set out to look for in the interviews. This might come up in the questions afterwards, but it was very, very reaffirming of our central idea of the effectiveness of poets as public diplomats. And just turning now to the fieldwork in Spain. So as Martin mentioned, Western Sahara was a Spanish colony, and lots of Sahrawi poets write and express themselves in Spanish rather than in Arabic or the Hassaniya dialect. And one such group of poets is the friendship generation, whom you can see a picture of some of that generation here. And they were constituted as such as a generation with this name, the friendship generation, in 2005. And they had a founding event as part of this. And through the event, they made a manifesto which outlined what role they saw for their work, for their poetry, and what they hoped to achieve by disseminating it. So here's some of the aims they outlined in their manifesto. So the defense and dissemination of the Sahrawi cause, to urge the Spanish Royal Academy and the Cervantes Institute to recognize the Sahrawis as a Spanish-speaking people, and to establish representation of these institutions in the Sahara. And we put our verses at the service of the Sahrawi people in their struggle for freedom and independence. So as you can see, among the aims of the friendship generation is this aim to further the pro-independence cause, so the state's principal cause, through the dissemination of poetry. And we think this is an example of what Suzanne Keane has called ambassadorial strategic empathizing. So this is when Keane says, and I'm quoting, an author addresses a chosen audience with the aim of cultivating their empathy for the in-group, often to a specific end. Appeals for justice, recognition, and assistance often take this form, end of quote. I think it's also significant that at this founding event, a Polisario representative who was also a poet took part. So there was state backing at this founding event. And just like to show you quickly an example of Sahrawi friendship generation poetry. Just bear me 1 second and I'll share our website. That's it. Wait a second. Bear with me, I'll get there. I should be used to Teams because that's what we use at Northumbria every day. Right. Okay. So hopefully you can see a website now. And this is one of the friendship generation poets, Zara El Hasnawi Ahmed. And I was just going to play you quickly The Silence of the Clouds.
El silencio de las nubes.
Can you hear it?
A las nubes no les quedan pastores.
Yes.
Thanks.
Se trasladan taciturnas en busca de los rebaños de dromedarios, las risas de los niños, los frics de jaimas, los pozos verdes y las melfas cantarinas. Todo es distinto. Se fueron. Y vino el silencio a cubrir la infinidad de narcótica pausa. Enmudecen los ríos, las palabras callan. La sombra de una nube consuela a una huérfana acacia. No queda nada. Las piedras que santifica el rezo y la acacia.
So in English, the silence of the clouds. The clouds no longer have herders. Taciturn they roam, in search of the flock of dromedaries, the laughter of children, the frigs of Hymas, the green wells, and the melodious melphas. Everything is different. They left, and the silence fell, covering the infinity of a narcotic repose. The rivers are muted, words kept quiet. The shadow of a cloud consoles an orphaned thorn tree. There's nothing left, stones hallowed by the prayer and the thorn tree. And I'll hand back to Mwati to explain the final stage of our fieldwork and our focus on poetry in the camps and also poetry coming from the occupied territories. I'll just reshare our slides. Here we are.
Thank you, Joanna. Now I'm going to talk about the iltifat and the use of the second person, the Sahara poems. The third group of the Sahara poets that we have focused on are the Sahrawi poets composing in the modern standard Arabic rather than Hassaniya or Spanish. Poets such as Hamza Lakhal, Malhani Lakhal, and Nana Labat al-Rashid have published books length collection with Larmatan and Larmatan Rast. Rast is the Spanish language acronym for the Sahrawi Arabic Democratic Republic. The books are marked in French. The blurbs are in French language or bilingual French and Arabic. But several poets have also had work translated into English for European and US-based poetry publication in order to reach a wider foreign audience, and have been invited to participate in reading abroad for example, in Belgium, France, Norway, Poland, Tunisia, and the UK. There is therefore a will among the modern Sahara poets writing in Arabic to engage a foreign audience, even if the letter is not explicit or aim for writing poetry in the same way that it is true for the friendship generation. Furthermore, the tendency in modern Arabic poetry to dedicate poems to the UN organs and mission or groups of foreign states or public, such as the international community, is of great interest to the study of the relationship between public diplomacy and poetry, since the implied second person or the object odd is traditional diplomatic actor, since the use of the second person tend to create a more immediate effect for the reader, and also it draws the listener in and give them an emotional stake to the poems. Hamza Lakhal poems about the UN Security Council is an example of this. This poem was part of the series of poems that Hamza wrote upon the November 2020 outbreak of war and Trump recognized of sovereignty over Western Sahara. Let me just explain a little bit about the Trump on the 10th of December 2020, immediately after the resumption of Western Sahara war between Morocco and Polisario Front, Morocco normalized diplomatic relation with Israel in exchange of Donald Trump unilateral decision. So, which was surprisingly announced via Twitter. That Donald Trump, through Twitter, he recognized that the alleged Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara. So in this occasion, Hamza Lakhal, and also in the occasion of the resumption of the armed struggle, Hamza Lakhal wrote this poem. All of the poems deals with diplomatic interviews and diplomatic actor. Let me just, it's quoted there, and I'm going to just read it. The global positioning system of the UN Security Council. To the UN Security Council who throw us in a long peace process with no solution. Go east, go west, and go north, then go south, until you become a see-through ghost. Sail and walk, go down and go down, go up, until you dry up. Take a right, then take a left. Have you found your homeland yet? No, I have not. Oh, okay, no way out. There is no residence for you. Go back and wander. Be satisfied and obey. There is nothing else within your grasp. Lakhal here, like many Sahrawis, Sahrawi poets writing in Arabic, uses the iltifat. The iltifat is a feature that's specially used in Quran and also in the early Arabic poetry, which means in English, the transition. And it's they move from one person to another. This make the reader and the listener wonder and impose questions and keep them focused. So and it is the grammatical person changes. It means the transition, and which means the grammatical person changed constantly. In doing so, Lakhal encouraged the audiences to feel the pain and the disorientation of the exile. And even though it is the Sahrawis, not the audiences, who are the second person, the UN Security Council poetic voice serves to further enhance that emotional connection with the audiences. I'll hand it over to Joanna again to give us a conclusion about the research.
Thanks, Marty. Actually, this picture on the slide, Marty took at one of the poetry events we attended in the camp. So you can see several national Sahrawi poets there, and they recited works in dialogue with national poets from other countries, including Algeria and Iraq, if I remember correctly. So we've argued that poetry can be considered a form of public diplomacy, and poets as public diplomats when advocating for a state policy, interest or cause. So Sahrawi poets have targeted audiences in Mauritania, their Spanish colonizers and the wider international community with their works in order to persuade them to support the Sahrawi national cause. And these particular audiences are significant given their role in Western Sahara's diplomatic history. So Mauritania, which occupied half the country till 1979, Spain for colonizing and failing to decolonize properly, and the wider international community, which is often reprimanded by Sahrawis for not holding Morocco to account. And I think we could see that in Hamza Lakhal's poem, which Marty just read for us. So poets' ability to affect their audiences, to move them emotionally and to nod to shared values between Sahrawis and international audiences contributes to their power as public diplomats. And Keen's concept of ambassadorial strategic empathizing has been key for us in understanding how this works. So we can see this concept at work in Sahrawi poetry, where the poet is employing empathy in the crafting of their art through the iltifat, for example, with a political aim in mind. And just as a final footnote, Marty and I wanted to mention that although we're looking at the relationship between poetry and diplomacy represented in Sahrawi poetry, there's many, many more genres of Sahrawi poetry, including an entire genre that reflects nostalgically on a cherished, beloved, but missed place, the faraway desert homeland. And we wanted to highlight that genre in particular, as we thought it might be of interest to people working through the Desert Disorders Network, given the focus in the network of challenging wide-held ideas about desert spaces as marginal, as landlocked, as barren, these sort of Orientalist ideas, as this genre of Sahrawi poetry helps to undo some of those ideas. So just wanted to end with an example of that. One of these poems in translation, and this poem's called Tishwash. It's by the late poet El-Badi and was translated by Mohammed Suleiman and Sam Berkson. So I'll read it in English, then Mwati will read us the original in Hassaniya. So Tishwash, as the translators note, can be roughly translated as nostalgia, but perhaps more accurately or correctly, it could be translated as the pleasure of remembering things that are past. All that has been gone, how great the living and everlasting God, but how beautiful this scene is. I see it sometimes, no particular place, just there with the goats, like those nights I spent at the mouth of a well, making the wet sand my bed. Enchanted by night's music, the howl of wild dogs and insects whine. Or in the watering season, when the wheat is still to produce its seed, I am there in the midst of the life of the camp, doing some little thing about which you do not need to ask. Or there we are, travelling in the dark before dawn, from one stopping place to the next, that only sound the swishing of camels' tails before the sun has risen to our eye line, walking on to those first lucid hours of the day when the desert's features are clearest, knowing both rocky valley and the smooth. And there again is the taste of tea, flavoured with da'ir, in water sourced from the valley floor after the rains, or scooped from pools on concave rocks where a river had run before. When we were moving our camp from a dried-up well, where the only firewood left was no better than kindling, and I can smell the animal hide next to the spit, and see the clean bones beside that hide. How come, my brother, you do not remember this, the sweet life full of living? It is no longer with us, and if Tishwash could bring it back, it would add Tishwash to the Tishwash. Wati, can you read the Hassaniya version?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. تشوش مات الماضي الصبحاني الحي الدايم ما قل منه زي عيت نشوف وما هو في حاضر ما حاضر في واش كيف نبات على فم حسي باللي تراه ماسيه فراش في الليل ينهول عندك عي البهانيس وحسه خشخاش والله يلا لك يا دهر الري زرع وما فات طلس الحراش الفرقان الحي وشوي ثاني مع عينك في التنباش وسرية من حي الحي في اتفاق مراكيب وتتناش قبل ظهور الشمس على ري العين المعالم فراش تنظرها مخافيك ودي منها في ملاس ولا في حراش وتاي علم ما فيه الطي من تورطة والله من مآش قيق بعيد هلو من الحفي ما هو قليل وحطب وخشخاش وفراش حذبل الشي وعظام على ذاك فراش عنك ما تتفقد يا خي هذا من شي لذيذ ينعاش ما هو في الدهر تلا موجود لو كانت تشواش بس ولاش نافعني فيهم ما نعود زدت على تشواش the poet is using really I mean difficult language even for us the young generation. It's difficult, it's old Hassaniya, but we still love that and we are always curious in discovering and knowing about like whatever is related to our our land, which we've never seen. It's been occupied, and we born here in Algeria, and we really love. From what they tell us, what they narrate to us, we really love. We feel like, or even if we do not, see those places, but we always feel that they are really there, and we are just. We will keep struggling and fighting for our independence, to see those those things that we read about and they told us about, and we hope that we will see them inshallah one day. And thank you so much for listening.